Hello everybody, I'm your host Wyatt Birkenoff, and for today's video, it is basically going to be a recap video of last week's stream I did on Monday, and it was about the history of voter fraud and general claims about the past voter fraud, and just trying to understand what voter fraud is and how big of a scale does voter fraud happen in the past and happen now, because obviously what we're doing now with Trump and his voter fraud claims. I wanted to make sure I had an understanding of what happened in the past, and then we can look at Trump's claims later on, but we are not going to cover a lot of those claims on today's stream about voter fraud. And then the next episode I'm going to have is the particular summary video I did on a live stream on Tuesday of last week, where I talked about voter ID laws and if they are suppressive or not. So if you do like those two videos, make sure you check those out. I'm going to have them as separate videos because I wanted to keep both of these short. So before I just keep talking and make these videos longer, I'm going to dive right into today's summary of what I covered on Monday in a shortened video. So basically there are several different types of voter fraud. There's impersonation fraud, where essentially someone comes up and votes for someone who has died, moved away, or simply claiming to be someone they're not, like a felon, or claiming to be a different name, as you see with false registrations. You also have duplicate voting, where somebody comes up and votes for the same candidate using potentially their same name or different types of names, but voting more than once. You also have use of voter fraud through absentee ballots, which is simply requesting ballots and voting without the knowledge of the actual voter, or obtaining an absentee ballot from a voter and either filling it in directly or forging the voter's signature, or illegally telling the voter who to vote for. You also have the idea of vying votes, where basically you're stuffing the ballot box or stuffing the physical voting polling locations algorithm, or whatever you want to call, and basically stacking votes. You also have illegal assistance at the polls, and that is either by a poll worker, family member, caretaker, where they're helping someone place their vote because maybe they can't see, or maybe they are hard at seeing, or don't know about the candidate, or elderly, or whatever the case may be, but you are voting for that person, and that is not allowed. You're also having the idea of altering the vote count, and that is essentially changing the vote count in a precinct to the central location where the votes are tallied. You also have a ballot petition fraud, where essentially they're forging signatures of registered voters on the ballot petitions to be filled for election officials in some states for a candidate to issue to be on the listed official ballot. So basically, in order to become that candidate and in order to get the ballots listed, you are stacking signatures of people who didn't actually say that they voted for you. So these are all types of voter fraud examples that we see, and some being more common than others. And what we also learned on the stream last Monday was that you could choose any state you wanted on this heritage.org, and it would have recent examples of voter fraud that happened in 2018, 2017, 2016. Let's just choose Texas so you can see it on screen with me right now. And you'll see some recent examples of the state of Texas and recent events of voter fraud. You see here, in 2019, Charles Nathan Jackson had a criminal conviction for fraudulent use of absentee ballots. In 2018, you had Miguel Hernandez, who had a criminal conviction of fraudulent use of absentee ballots. Then in 2018, you had Russ Casey, a criminal conviction ballot petition fraud, and go on and on and on, all the way to 2017 on Justice's first list of recent voting fraud through the use of ineligible voting or impersonation fraud. And we also learned that impersonation fraud is unlikely and one of the more least likely events of fraud to actually happen, because it is much harder to get past, and really it relies on human error at the polling station than anything else. So it's not a huge concern. We learned that the biggest type of voter fraud is the type of malpractice, and essentially being the candidate wanting to stuff ballots, or the candidate paying people to vote for them, or the candidate doing something to change the alteration of what actually happened. That is the most common type of fraud, and it is candidate based. It is the organization based of type of fraud. So in other words, the idea that individual people are changing the vote through voting twice or whatnot isn't exactly what's happening. It's more an organized effort by candidates to win local elections, because we haven't seen such a wide scale of voter fraud to overturn a general election like a president, but we have seen local examples of voter fraud where once that fraud was taken out and they were able to verify that that fraud existed on a local level, they were able to overturn the election, and we also saw some cases of that happening on my larger stream. But the biggest case of voter fraud is not basically individually based, but candidate based, as I said before. And it doesn't so much happen on such a wide scale that it could affect the president, but more local and individual candidate levels than widespread. That being said, some of the claims Trump was making, what we briefly talked about on that live stream, if they are true, could overturn these states and he could win the general election based off of all of those frauds. But the idea of it happening on such a large general scale has not been seen before, and some people do compare it to the Ross Perot situation, but that only happened in one state of Florida, so you can't exactly verify that 100%. You also have the case where 400 unverified voters made Balance Recruit a hoax. And there was this article that we played a video of the prosecutor channel, and he was talking about this guy who's in charge of the Voter Integrity Project, and he was talking about some data for this most recent election and why it just doesn't make sense, and it just seems to have some underlying efforts of fraud. But it wasn't all positive on the fraud's sake in looking at fraud. We did cover a recent article made by 538 at the time, where it talked about how the idea of this fraud happening at such a wide general scale was so unlikely, and it mentioned that there was a poll statistic done where it showed that 52% of Republicans believe that President Trump rightfully won, despite little evidence of it widely being known. But we didn't cover too much of that on that last stream, but I thought I would mention that at the end of this video as well, just so you can understand that we did cover both sides. But the main focus of that last live stream in this video was the idea of showing and trying to understand how big the scale of voter fraud is, and what positions or what authorities or what events does it actually happen in. Is it a general concern that every American should have because it affects president elections, or is it more governors and mayors and maybe senators, and that's who it affects? And from the stream and from this video, we discovered that it affects more local levels, but there hasn't been such a widespread level like Trump has been claiming. But that this election is so different, so the idea that Trump's claims are 100% wrong is hard to say at this point, but we do not know very much evidence